to do with the data?
No, so today I'm going to talk about how the 16S sequencing and metagenomics capture the microbiota picture. So what I want to talk about is more about microbial ecology concepts rather than techniques or type of analysis. So I will go through the targeted metagenomics, which the 16S is one of the particular case. I will go through the metagenomics, and I want to do a quick focus on the rare biosphere and give you or mention some alternative and or complementary approaches. So most of you should know that we had a paradigm shift in microbiology. So up to the 80s, all the microbiology study was made using pure culture. But also during this time, each time that we are thinking of a bacteria associated with a human, we were thinking of a pathogenic bacteria. And early in the 80s, some findings have started to shift this vision of the microbial world. The first one is that the vast majority of the microorganisms are uncultured. And even if you are able to culture them, their behavior in culture does not always reflect their activity in situ in their environment. So this really has shown that we need to develop new tools that will allow the study in their environment. And this has been made possible by the work of Carl Woese that have shown that RNA genes can provide evolutionary clocks, meaning that you can do taxonomy with RNA genes. So this has shifted after the mid-80s to use molecular tools and to see the microorganism as complex and diverse microbial assemblages. So it's how the microbial ecology were born. So the microbial ecology examines the diversity of the microorganism and how they interact with each other and with their environment, which could be an host. So there is two main questions in microbial ecology. The first one is who is there? So what taxa and in which abundance are they present in the environment? And this is very often referred as the structure of your environment. And the other question is, what are they doing? What are their functions in the environment? And the most challenging is to be able to do this link between who is there and what are they doing. So one of ways to study the microorganism directly in their environment is to use the barcoding or the targeted metagenomics. So I just want to do not confuse when I say barcode. I'm not speaking about the barcode for library preparation. I'm talking about the fact of using a gene that will represent each taxa of your community. So the idea is that you have your community, you extract the DNA, and on each of their genomes, you will amplify the marker that will allow you to represent the community. So, and then you will analyze this amplicon, or historically by fingerprint techniques and cloning sequencing, and of course nowadays using the Illumina sequencing. So the most common widely used markers are taxonomic markers, so the 16S for the bacteria and archaea, and the 18S for the eukaryotes. But you can also use functional markers. So you might want to look at the diversity of a particular function in your environment. So here you have a few examples of what have been done in the gut microbiota so far. So you have like function like the butyrate formation, for example. And you also have markers that can actually do both. So it's functional gene of which the phylogeny is congruent with the 16S or the 18S, depending of the domain. And one of the examples are the methanogens. So you can both look at the diversity of the methane formation and identify the metagens that are present. The barcoding. So let's talk about more specifically about the 16S, but what I'm going to say is, of course, applicable to any marker that you might use. So this technique strongly relies on PCR amplification. So you need to be able to target all your variants, but target only the gene of interest, so in this case the 16S. And because we have switched from using cloning sequencing, where we were able to study the full length of the 16S, to high-throughput sequencing technology with shorter reads, we need now to target only a portion of the 16S. So you need to choose a region to target that will allow you to have enough variability to distinguish the different species, and that is framed by regions that are conserved enough so you can target all your variants. And what I want to show you is that not all the regions of the 16S are equal. So here you have an example of the gut microbiota for 3 samples. You have an assignation with the full length, V2, V4, and V6. And what you can see is that the profile that you get with the V6 region is very different than the one with the full length. So the V6 is not very representative of your community. So the closest one is actually the V4, which is why nowadays most of the gut microbiota study use the V3, V4 primers. So it's because it targets a good region and because the primer pair has a good coverage on the bacterial domain. I want to point out that even if it seems that you have a good coverage on the archaeal domain and that you are able to detect some archaeal read using this primer pair, this should not be used to describe the diversity of the archaea. Because even if here, with one mismatch, it seems that we are able to amplify quite a lot of archaea, the reality is that when you do a PCR on a community, you are in front of what we call a multi-template PCR amplification. So you have a complex and multiple combination in your tubes. So one mismatch can be a huge stress for a PCR amplification in that circumstance. Very quickly, I want to show you something with the main databases. So if the 6NS is so widely used, it's not only because it's a good marker, it's also because it's a marker that has the most extensive databases to this date. So this will probably cover by a later talk. I just want to show you something when you compare your data with the literature. Because these databases are different in terms of sequence that are inside and their updates, but they have also different phylogeny. So here I'm showing you the order of the Clostridial, and you can see that for RDP and Sylvia, you will find the family Clostridiaceae 1, 2, 3, and 4, but these family are not present in green genes. It doesn't mean that the sequence are not present, it just means that they are classified differently with a different name. So when you compare your data with the literature, be aware of the databases that they have used, because you might talk about the same taxa, but with a different name and different classification. So as I said, the 6NS relies a lot on the PCR, and PCR has a lot of limitations. So there is two categories. The first one is the sequence artifact, also called PCR errors. And today I'm going to give you one example, the chimera formation. And the second category is the unequal amplification, which we call PCR biases. And I'm going to give you one example of the intrinsic differences in the amplification efficiency of the templates. So let's start with the chimeras. So the chimeras are formed from two or more biological sequences joined together. And this is very common in amplicon sequencing because you have closely related sequences that are all mixed together and amplified together. There is several mechanisms, but the most common one is the one that arises from an aborted extension. So what happens is that you have one strain, here is an example of a strain A. So at one cycle of PCR, the extension is aborted. And this short fragment can then be used as a primer for a later cycle. And it can prime with another strain, here the strain B. So you will have some mismatch, but the annealing will be strong enough so you can have extension. So at the following step, you find yourself with a new artificial molecule, form of the strain A and the strain B. And this molecule will keep being amplified, which is why, and more you will proceed cycles of PCR, more you will have this phenomenon, which is why usually in library preparation, it's advised to lower down as much as possible the number of cycles of amplification. Now into PCR biases. So here I'm showing you the example of the GC content of the priming region, and this is due to the fact that we use universal degenerated primer. So to have primer that cover all our targets, we need to use degenerated nucleotides. So here again you have the example of the V3, V4, and you can see that both in the forward and reverse primer you have degenerated nucleotide, which means that you're actually using different combinations of your primer all together. And some of them will be rich in AT, and others will be rich in GC. And because you have 3 hydrogen bonds between G and C, the annealing with this combination will be stronger. So you will have another amplification of the template that possessed initially in their priming site a higher GC content. So just by using this primer, you introduce a bias in the picture of your microbiota. So I'll just go through quickly to the barcoding, which use the PCR to target a particular marker, but you can of course analyze directly your genomic DNA, and it's what we call the metagenomics. So the metagenomics is the analysis of genome sequence data recovered directly from the environment. And you can analyze your data in two different ways. You can analyze them unassembled to monitor the whole community functional capabilities, or you can try to piece them together using algorithm for the assembly. This technique has several advantages. The first one is that you don't need to do a PCR amplification, so you are exempt of all the limitation, bias, and error due to the use of these techniques. You can have access to the full functional potential of the microbial community, so not only one functional marker. You can both analyze the taxonomy and the functionality of your ecosystem. And you can try to assemble, to reconstruct genome directly from your environment, which will allow you to link the structure and the function, which is so challenging. So this is a very powerful technique. However, you still have quite a lot of limitations. The first one is that the concertomic marker represents only a small portion of your reads, which means that you access to the identity of only the dominant, the main abundant taxa of your environment. So you don't have a full description of the diversity. A significant proportion of the data will not be assigned to a function, and this is because you will lack a cross-match reference databases because it's a new sequence, or it's because the protein that will match or the gene that will match with your reads have a non-function. And this is due to the fact that in the databases you have an over-representativity of the culture organism. So you end up to identify functions that were known from culture organism. So like if you are culturing your environment. And even if you can reconstruct genomes, which is very interesting, this is actually very challenging, and this will increase with the complexity of the community. Because you will have a pool of distinct and related genomes, so it will be very easy to reconstruct dominant taxa, for which you have a lot of reads, but for the low abundance and rare taxa, you will not have a coverage enough to allow you to reconstruct a genome. So I talked quite a lot about low abundance and rare taxa, and I really want to stress out that when I talk about rare taxa, I'm not speaking about taxa that are rarely distributed across gut microbiota. I'm talking about taxa that are in each environment in low abundance, but that can be widely distributed across the human population. So the rare biosphere is defined as the vast majority of microbial taxa that are highly diverse and present at very low abundance in a given environment at a specific time point. It's also described as the long tail on the rank abundance curve. So here you have a rank abundance curve, which is the number of OTU and their abundance. And you can see that you have few OTUs that are highly abundant, and then numerous OTU that are in a very low abundance. So this long tail has a lot of weight when you look at the diversity of your ecosystem, but for some other reason, when you analyze the relative abundance, you tend to discard all the OTUs that are below 1%. So we usually structure the community like this. Above 1%, you are talking about dominant taxa. Between 1 and 0.1, about low abundance taxa, sometimes referred as common taxa. And then below 0.1%, you are talking about rare taxa. So one of the question is that if they are so low abundance, does they matter for your ecosystem? And the answer is yes. The first thing is that taxa can be rare in very various ways. They can be conventionally rare, which means that over time, or for different macro niches, they can be rare, but in other circumstances, they become dominant. So here in blue, you have the example of a rare taxa that become dominant periodically over time. So this could be, for example, because you have a substrate that appear in the ecosystem, so your taxa grow, and then the substrate disappears, so they become rare again. And the substrate reappear, etc., etc. You can have also an occasional recruitment from the rare biosphere after, for example, a disturbance. So if you talk about the gut microbiota, it could be an antibiotic treatment, because this taxa has an antibiotic resistance, so now is able to grow and dominate the ecosystem. The other thing is that for a very long time, rare taxa were seen as inactive cells, but the reality is that they can be active. They can be very active and not being able to grow because they are subject to a strong viral predation, for example, a control by bacteriophages. They can metabolize particular substrate present in low abundance. So they are active, but because their substrate is not present in concentration enough, they are not growing quickly. And they also can be disproportionately active, which means that they are very active, they are participating to the metabolism of the ecosystem, but they are not going into cellular division. And this rare biosphere is important because it can have a very strong role in the microbial ecosystem. The first one is that they participate to the phenomenon of resistance and resilience. So the resistance is defined as the degree to which a community is sensitive to a disturbance, which could be, for example, an antibiotic treatment. And the resilience is the capacity of a community to return to its pre-disturbance condition. And why the rare taxa are important for this phenomenon is because they can act as a seed bank, so a reservoir of new metabolic function. Let's say in your gut microbiota you have a new xenobiotic, so a new molecule that can be toxic for the ecosystem. But if you have a rare taxa that is able to detoxify this molecule, it will be, of course, very important for the survival of the ecosystem, and it can become dominant. And they also participate to the phenomenon of guilds. So the guilds are a group of microbial taxa with functional redundancy. So they have the same role in the ecosystem, but they will grow with different conditions. And this is the example of antibiotic resistance. So by having taxa that have the antibiotic resistance, they can come and do the function that taxa that are not resistant cannot do anymore. They can also be keystone taxa. So the keystone taxa are taxa that have a disproportionately large effect on their environment. So they are very rare, but if you remove them from the environment, the full environment will collapse. And this is because they can be gatekeeper. So they are specialist degrader of molecules that will not be degraded other way. And they can also be helper of the community members. So it means that they ensure function in your environment that are necessary and not covered by other taxa. And this is the Black Queen hypothesis. And I just want to finish by mentioning some alternatives. The first one is the quantitative PCR. So it's a very well-known complementary approach to the 6NS and the metagenomics, because I really want to stress out that the 6NS is not a quantitative method. You are talking about relative abundances. The only way to exactly know if your taxa are increasing or decreasing is to use the quantitative PCR. And this is a new paper in which they use macrofluidic quantitative PCR. So they are able to do in the same time hundreds of qPCR reactions. So they have a profile that is similar to the 16S, but with the advantage of being quantitative. You have a technique that is called a targeted gene capture by hybridization. So it's a technique that is in between the 16S and the barcoding, between the barcoding and the metagenomics. So like for the barcoding, you can target a particular marker, but instead of using a PCR amplification, you will use probes. So you will be able to target only one marker, so have the full diversity of this marker, but have no PCR biases. You have what is called the single-cell genomics. So in the single-cell genomics, you will, instead of targeting a gene, you target a cell, and you amplify and sequence the genome. And I just want to also point out that now exists a computational model that allows you to do studies on the gut microbiota in silico. So in conclusion, I want to say that the 16S and metagenomics are very powerful, but they give only a picture of your environment that can be biased and non-quantitative. And that to use them, you need to have the appropriate biological question. If you want to see the function of your environment and you use the 16S, it might not be the most appropriate one. Do not forget the rare taxa. There is no valuable reason to discard OTU below 1%. All the taxa are important for the ecosystem. And don't forget that there is alternative and complementary methods that can help you. And I will close this talk the same way I started, by talking about culture, to say that we need to keep going, trying to culture organisms so we can characterize their function and improve the databases and therefore the analysis of the metagenomics data. Thank you.